Good evening, all, and welcome. It's time to brace for the thunderstorm on this dark and eerie night. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I am a 23 Italian male, living in a not-so-small town in southern Italy. Now, it's not the most secure town in the world. In fact, we've had a long history of micro-criminality connected to the local mafia. But if you are smart and keep to yourself, you stay out of trouble. I need to explain my daily commute and context first, to make things better to understand. Basically, I live in the old part of town, as here it's common for every town to be built around its antique part. And after an earthquake in the 1980s destroyed a good part of it, it's very affordable to live here, and some parts are beautiful and well kept. Others are not, so you find good families and great folks sharing spaces with more pesky dudes. Now, the encounter itself happened in January. I just came back from university. It's just a 20-minute drive in car, but in shitty public transport, it can take anywhere up to an hour and a half to get home. I often like to study in the library, which closes at 6:30, so I'll usually make it home for 8 PM or later. On this particular day, I greeted my dog, Maya, and I take her for a walk around the old part of town and the castle, since it's her favourite spot to meet other street dogs. So she's taking longer than usual to do her business, and I was freezing. I was probably wearing the wrong kind of clothes, and it was snowing, which is super rare here, and I think it was the first time that Maya had ever seen snow, so she was very excited. It was for this reason that I decided to walk back home and grab a jacket to better take delight of this occasion. And on my walk home, as a shortcut, I passed by this abandoned building that's under construction. It's pretty shit and has the pillars and floor done, but a lot of kids use it to play and climb around in. Now, as I walk there, I see this guy standing there, his back facing me, still like a rock with his head facing up to the first floor of the abandoned building. He was wearing a dirty beanie, heavy winter jacket, and a tracksuit far too wide for his build, and he just stood there still. At first I froze on the spot too, but it wasn't an extraordinary encounter since there were a lot of strange people around. I watched Maya, and she had her back fur raised and was looking at this dude. She never stared at anyone for this long. We walk to him, and she keeps this behaviour up, and as we're walking there she emits this low-pitched growl that makes the man turn around. I've never ever seen his face around here, and if you aren't local, you really shouldn't end up there if you didn't want to. And oh my god, his face was creepy as hell. The typical greasy hair, undone 3-day beard, and he extended his hand to Maya. "Hey doggy, how cute are you?" Stupidly, that calmed me down a bit, but maybe he was just a mentally ill person walking around. I don't know. But he was trying to pet my dog, and then I hear movement on the first floor's concrete. I thought it must have been a cat, but Maya at this point would already be jumping around trying to catch him if this were the case. So I look up, and I see this little girl of around 10 years old. She only had fear in her eyes, wide open. She was desperate. She had a familiar face though. She must have been one of the kids that used to play around the building, and she must have seen me walking my dog, because as soon as she recognized me, she caught my eye and whispered, "Help." After this I turned my head around, and the creep is watching me now. I would like to say he had the usual creepy smile, but he didn't. He just had a very serious face looking dead into my eyes. I don't know what to do. I'm a 6'2" guy, but I've never fought anyone, and I am a really, really peaceful guy. In a fraction of a second, this guy looks up again and says, "Calm down, sweetie. We need to go home or the food will get cold." Yeah, sure, totally believable. 10 out of 10, mate. Who are you and what are you doing here, I ask him. I'm her uncle. I need to get her home to eat, he says with the most serious look. I was thinking what to answer, to use as an excuse to bring her down and get her to safety, and being the sarcastic bitchy type I am in this situation, I say, that's strange, because I'm her uncle and this doesn't add up. At this point the little girl chimes in and has the brilliance to lean over and say, hey uncle, can you help me get home? Mum will be worried. Now this guy didn't seem to be threatening at the moment, just creepy. So I go under the building to take the little girl as I prepare to grab her. Now this guy didn't seem to be threatening at the moment, just creepy. So I go under the building to grab her. As I prepare her, Maya, thank goodness, growls at the guy, and then she begins to bark loudly at the guy. Now she usually has a really high feminine pitch bark, but with this guy it was really low pitched, and it even scared me a little. To that I turn around and see this guy with his bare hands reaching for something behind his back. Oh shit, I think. I can't fight for shit hand on hand, and if this guy has a knife, this is going to end up badly for me. He stops his reaching motion as the bark is now continuous. And the heat of the moment, the little girl leaned off, and I grabbed her with one arm, and used the other one to keep Maya at bay as a deterrent. And while she were descending, I asked her if she had a phone. She said she didn't. And as the words came out of her mouth, you could tell that she was on the brink of tears. So as soon as she touched the ground, I unlocked my phone and gave it to her. She took the phone and immediately legged it. I should have been glad, but my immediate thought was, if she did all this as some elaborate plot to steal my phone, I'm gonna be pissed. So anyway, the girl is gone. I turned around, and this dude has a giant knife. Not a pocket knife, one of those big ass kitchen knives that you use to cut bakery bread. And me being so careless in the kitchen, I know how sharp those damn things can be. So I decided to run away, but Maya decided, nope, I want to stand here barking at him, and I couldn't manage to pull her away. She is an almost 30-kilogram dog, but that was a grip too strong for even her. So we were there stalling, and this guy starts swinging the knife in the air. I want to run, but if I leave my dog, I know she could end up really bad, and if I manage to pull her off, he could run after us. And there will be him swinging a knife around with empty eyes, my dog barking and me shitting myself, not knowing what to do. And to make things worse, my hands were freezing cold for not wearing any gloves, and the leash grip was really starting to hurt. The thing that still surprised me in this situation is the fact that I'm absolutely sure the people around the block could hear the mess, but not a single one decided to take a damn look or try and help. After the 2-minute standoff, I hear heavy footsteps from the street I came from, and then a lot of people show up. Probably her dad or some of her relatives and friends with a baseball bat. This is not going to end well, I thought. As soon as the creep saw those guys, he threw his knife in my direction and started to run to me, trying to go in my direction in the street. I didn't even try and block him off. I was still frozen by the knife undertow, but Maya bit his leg, ripping a piece of his tracksuit off. I still have it. She's so proud of it. One of her favorite new toys. But the dude didn't even care and ran for his life, with some of the girl's supposed relatives behind him. He eventually managed to outrun them, but the girl's father came to me. I thought to thank me, but instead he screamed, "Who the hell was that guy?" waving the bat around. I looked at the girl, telling him to calm down, but he only got more pissed until the girl ran up telling him that I helped her and gave me my phone back. After that, he calmed down and apologized and thanked me for helping his daughter and offered to grab me some coffee at his house. I politely declined and went home, deciding I'd already put up with too much shit that night, and decided to go to sleep. The next morning the police rang my doorbell to take my statement, and I told them the guy managed to run off. The police showed me some photographs to see if I could ID a suspect, but nothing came of it. He was from out of town, you could tell by his accent. and that was the end of it. I'm glad the little girl managed to get home safe. So creepy, wannabe uncle dude. Let's not meet again. I always felt there was something weird going on in my bedroom when I was a teenager. I thought the place was haunted. I heard noises coming from my closet all the time, and the door would randomly be opened when I entered the room, despite me knowing for a fact that I had closed it. Normally, when I told my parents about these things, they would dismiss it. I would be told that I probably forgot that I had left the door open, and that the noises I heard were just the house settling or an animal on the roof. I guess I understood why my parents didn't believe me. They didn't believe in the supernatural or anything like that. Anyway, this happened on a night that I stayed up really late doing homework. I was at my desk and working on some pretty complicated maths homework. I was up so late that I ended up falling asleep at my desk. It wasn't something that I ever did that much. I woke up feeling disoriented at first. I was woozy, and it took a few minutes to realize that I had fallen asleep whilst doing homework. I thought I'd just get up and roll into bed and sleep for a bit. I raised up and pushed my chair out from my desk. As I moved to stand up, I was shocked when I saw a little girl crouched under my desk. She was disheveled and had a really nasty wound on her forehead. In shock, I fell backwards, knocking my chair back too, and it fell over. I never took my eyes off the girl, and she stared straight at me. Then, I struggled to get up, and when I got to my feet, she was suddenly gone. I was freaked out, but I wasn't sure what to do. I was an only child, and both of my parents worked the third shift. They wouldn't be home all night. I took the blanket off my bed, and then I went into the living room and laid down. I left a light on, covered up and tried to go to sleep. It was hard though. I kept expecting to see her again. After a long time, I finally fell asleep without seeing her. I decided not to tell my parents about it. They would just tell me that I was dreaming or something like that. But for a long time, it was hard sleeping in my room. I kept looking at my desk every night expecting to see her underneath it, watching me. This happened to me last winter during the first snowstorms. I am a student in a small university town, and I was living off campus at the time with my roommate in a 2-apartment house. So a few weeks prior to the fall, my roommate and a friend had taken a questionable substance at our place, and I was babysitting them. In the course of their trip, one of them had pulled the door handle off the front door, since they were basically on another plane of existence. Door handles were tricky to figure out. Fast forward a few weeks, it was early winter, and our door had not been fixed. We had gotten into the habit of just leaving it unlocked, so you'd only have to push the door in order for it to swing open, as there was no handle and it was tricky to open from the outside when it was closed, as there was nothing to pull on. And it was tricky to open from the inside when it was closed, as there's nothing to pull on. Now, we were still able to deadbolt it at night, but being in the small town that we lived in, we usually left it unlocked during the day, even if neither of us were there. So one evening I had gone to bed around 11 PM, and I think my roommate probably headed to bed shortly after. Usually I was the one who locked the doors at night out of habit, but tonight I'd gone to bed a bit early and assumed my roommate would take care of it. Wasn't a big concern. I woke up at 8 AM next morning, and being a smoker, The first thing I did was step out and have a quick smoke before showering. We had a small porch outside the front door, so I threw on my coat and stepped out to light up. I was just flicking the lighter on when I noticed that there were some footsteps in the snow on the porch, where a light snow had fallen during the night. The tracks led from the end of our driveway, up the door, then over to the front of the living room window, to the left, and then back to the door. At this point I was freaking out, because the door had been unlocked all night, and you only needed to push to get in, and these tracks led straight there. My first thought was that perhaps our roommate got a visitor overnight, but I quickly dismissed the idea. I then panicked and went back inside, in case whoever this was had entered the house and was still in there. So I went back to examine the footprints closer. A closer look revealed that after they went up to the door, they turned a right off the porch, walking closely along the side of my house, where my bedroom window is. And it looked as though they had stopped there briefly before moving on. This is where it gets really weird. I continued following the tracks, trying to figure out what the hell this person was doing at our apartment in the middle of the night. They turned a sharp right, still hugging the side of our house, and along the wall where my roommate's bedroom window was, and carried on past the apartment in the building. At this point there's a small paved road gap between our building and the next three on the street. It's like a slightly larger alleyway-sized space. I'd like to point out, as these tracks crossed our neighbour's lawn, it seems they couldn't decide to keep going to the next house, or go back to the sidewalk, as they weaved back and forth. These tracks led across the gap, and up to the corner of their next house, and stopped directly in front of a gutter drain pipe down the side. The footsteps shuffled here on the spot, or stood in the front of the gutter for a while, and then continued around the corner to the front of the next apartment, across their lawn, and quickly turned down the side of their building. This was an even smaller path, which led to a wooden door along the back garden, which was completely fenced in. These footprints paced up and down the side of the house what looked like many times, before apparently going into their closed-off backyard. This apartment happened to be abandoned at the time, with a big rent sign on the window, so as far as we knew no one lived there. Having gotten as far as I could, I went to see where the hell these tracks had come from. They had come from a long dirt path directly to our place. This is a dirt path that you only went along if you're going somewhere in our small suburb. To walk down there, directly to our place, you must know where you're going, as it's quite out the way. I was pretty freaked out, as I didn't know if they had entered our apartment at night, and judging from their path, they seemed disturbed. I told my roommate when he got up, but he didn't seem too freaked out about it, and suggested it was a meter reader. I had thought maybe too, except our electrical box is on the complete other side of the house, and there were no tracks there. I still have no idea what this guy was up to, but it still creeps me out to this day. Mostly because I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what was going on, as I was the only one who seemed concerned about the possible creeper in the house. Needless to say, I always made sure to lock the door after that. A couple of years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work as my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all of you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it even calls for snow, and grocery stores are raided the night before. I had decided to go and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend, now wife, since the mayhem had ended, and only 2 people like me had trucks for all terrain. I went into Walmart, I got all the groceries I needed, and started my way back to my truck. It had started to snow harder, and there was already about 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was around 12 in the afternoon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies the next couple of days with my girlfriend. just when I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm. As I turned, I saw an older looking lady, and she asked me if I had any cigarettes. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her that I didn't, and turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm, and then she told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment and wanted money for a hotel. Again, I told her I had no money on me. At this point she said, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of this situation, I said, "No, I didn't," which was a lie, thinking she would leave me alone. She then said, "Oh, okay, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet with my granddaughter and her dog, who are in the hotel lobby waiting? It's right up the road here, I can show you." With me being a Christian, I knew I couldn't deny this woman, as I always try and help people out. So I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule to never judge a book by its cover. Plus, being a 6-foot-tall male, I thought I could shake her off if things got dicey. So she jumped in my truck, and against all odds, the next thing she does is start to light up a cigarette in my truck. I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette, since obviously she had some. She obliged, and threw the cigarette out the window to my dismay. So we started driving up the road towards her hotel, at which point I'm on high alert. At the moment of going through worst case scenarios in my head, I noticed her fumbling through her purse searching for something, and looking out of the corner of her eyes at me. At which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so don't try anything crazy." Now, I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of the back seat a couple of days earlier, and in reality would be no use to me here if she pulled a gun on me at that moment. She just stopped messing around in her purse and pulled a cell phone out her pocket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from some friends." Okay. At this point, red flags were firing off again. But trying to be a good Christian and not judging a book by its cover kept running through my mind. So I told her fine, but to be quick, because I needed to get home. At that moment she dialed someone on her phone and said, "Yeah, this guy's coming to bring me to get the stuff. Are you ready, right?" At that point I asked her to talk to the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he'd been chain smoking since birth said, "Hello?" I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" and asked him if indeed he knew of any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over words when he said he had to go. At this point I should have gotten a clue and kicked her out of my car, especially after watching so many horror movies. This is when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. But for fear of her actually telling the truth and me feeling like a terrible person, I decided to go on. At this point we turned down the street, and I saw a cop car sitting there on the side of the road. I wanted to go drop her off at the cop, but it would be terrible if she actually were telling the truth. So I passed the cop, and at this point, which is weird, an eerie smile on her face said, "Glad he's there, I feel safe." Now as we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down. Just a very unsettling place even during the snow. As I parked outside the place her friend was, she said, "Okay, I'll get the guy and be back." And I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to just get the heck out of this Dodge, and to this she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I left her there, in this weather under these conditions. At this point I got mad. After all, I went out of my way to help her, and as I waited I started to think about what she said, and what could happen. What if she brought a knife or a gun, or worse? And at that moment I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realized things were not right. She had set me up to be robbed or something. Because those guys were big, and one of them had something behind their back that I couldn't see. At that moment, I put it in reverse and took off. Thank God for four-wheel drive. I looked back at them chasing me, to see what was hidden behind one of the guy's backs. It was a crowbar. I don't know what would have happened to me, but looking back I see how dumb and blind I was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area. The closest hotel or motel was about 20 minutes away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they would have probably beaten me and robbed me, or worse. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to get married until this event. After that, I've never been to the Walmart in that area, or that area in general ever again for that matter. A couple of months after, I told a co-worker this story, and he told me that about a year ago the same lady tried to do the same thing with him. But he declined everything, and she moved on. So horrible lady who lied about having breast cancer to trick people into doing awful things? I hope you get what's coming to you, and let's never meet again. So be careful who you help out there, because some people will take advantage of you, or maybe worse. This incident took place when I was around 6 years old. I lived in a decent neighborhood. We did have the occasional creepy person that would walk or bike by. We also had some apartment buildings where the people living there were heavy into drugs, but didn't bother anyone. They were nice people to talk to, and frequently mentioned that they were into that stuff. They never bothered me, so I didn't care. The house I lived in at that point was a very decent size. My dad also built a garage, a huge garage. Now this is where the things happened. This garage was huge and it had enough space for 3 vehicles and rafters on the ceiling for storage and seasonal stuff. This took place in December. I live in Atlantic Canada, and in Atlantic Canada, we get some pretty nasty snowstorms and blizzards. On a day in December, I was being a little kid in the snow, and my dad was working the garage on his car project. He had gotten thirsty and went in the house to get a drink. He came back out and asked if I had gone into the garage. I asked why, and he said that there were footprints in the snow leading into the garage, and that he didn't think that they were his. I said no, and we both thought nothing of it. That evening, my dad and I went to bed early. She came home late, and saw that some of my toys that were in the rafters stored away were on the garage floor. She thought nothing of it, moved them and parked the vehicle in the garage, closed the door, went into the house, saw some TV and went to sleep. Now, my dad wakes up every day at 4 AM to be at work for 5. The garage door was opened when my dad was awake, so naturally he was angry. Everyone woke up and goes to the garage, comes back in, and is freaking out. There is a lot of very expensive equipment missing. We called the cops. The lights outside were flicked on, and we saw those same mysterious footprints leading to the garage earlier, in the backyard, and in the forestry behind my house. The cops searched the garage, and my mum brought up that the toys had fallen from the rafters. The cops asked to borrow a ladder and went back up to check. They found a gun, a meat cleaver, and 3 condoms, 2 of which were used. I did not sleep for a week. I was terrified. They caught the guy 2 weeks later trying to sell all of my dad's equipment at a pawn shop. He confessed to everything. He said he broke into other houses on the street, and he also stated he watched our house for a whole month to learn all of our routines so he wouldn't get caught. And he had all those weapons in case he did get caught in the act. He is currently serving a 15-year prison sentence, and I don't want to know what would have happened to my mum or dad or me had we caught him. A few years ago, when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been to upstate New York during the winters, you'll know that it can snow a lot. I usually spent snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house, and my roommate was out. I'll be honest, being alone made me feel uncomfortable. I've always had an overactive imagination. A small noise and I can freak out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night and I was watching TV as normal. When all of a sudden, I heard a crunch outside, like someone stepping on ice. I immediately tensed up and my mind raced to every possibility. It wasn't my roommate since I didn't hear a car. I listened in horror, as I could hear the crunching getting louder. I ran into my room and locked the door. I got out my shotgun and grabbed my phone ready to call 911. Just in case. I know I might have been overreacting. But remember this night, in heavy snow miles away from any other house? Who could possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point, and I eventually fell asleep and woke up when my roommate was back. I went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I find still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was hard to figure out where they were going. The scariest part of all of this is that the footprints stopped outside my bedroom window. The other footprints were filled in, but these were fresh, as if someone had been standing there all night, since the snow stopped early in the morning. To this day it still scares me. I don't know what kind of person would be out in the woods. The fact that whilst I was in my room, they were standing just outside my window still freaks me out, and I moved out a few months later. This happened when I was 13 years old. I began hanging out at my friend Sean's house, more often after school. My parents didn't have any problem with it. As long as you got your homework done, they always told me. And yeah, I did get my homework done. But I have to be honest, that this was not why I went over there. I went over there because he had a Super Nintendo and I didn't. And yeah, this was in 1992. Often I would go to Sean's house and wouldn't get home till about 9 or 10 at night. I didn't tell my parents. I'd tell my parents I was then going to bed, and instead, I would go and do my homework really quickly before finally going to sleep. Sean's house was on the other side of town from my parents' house. We also lived in a really small town. It was really well known for being a retirement town. There were lots of really old people there, but there were also lots of families too. Our town also had a covered bridge in it, and that bridge had a story about it. Apparently there was a ghost or a troll or something that was underneath it. Some people called it a troll, but most people said it was a ghost, since you only see it every now and then. Supposedly, it was first seen by a teenage couple who had been making out underneath it back in the 1950s. And it had then been spotted pretty frequently since then. In fact, you always heard a new story about it, sometime around Halloween. I crossed over that bridge every night, and I was coming home from Sean's house, and it didn't usually bother me. Not too much anyway. I have to admit to sometimes running really quickly across the bridge in scarier instances, like around Halloween. Well, this happened in April. I remember it for many reasons, but one of those reasons was that Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past had just been released. Sean got a copy of it the day it came out, and the two of us were addicted. It was a single-player game, but we collaborated on it and got further along. On this night, we had lost track of time. We made so much progress, and by the time it was time for me to leave and go home, it was way past midnight. It was a weekend, so my parents really didn't care, but I hated walking home that late. I told Sean that I would be back next afternoon, and I went on my way. When I got to the bridge that spanned the small creek, I was shocked to see it was completely blocked off. There had been an accident on it earlier that day, so I would have to go down under the bridge in order to get home. I had done it plenty of times before, but never at night. I got down nervously and made my way across the small creek. There were rocks, so I didn't really get my feet wet. I was creeped out the entire time. I kept thinking that I heard noises that probably weren't there, and the noises that were there were even worse. While I crossed the rocks, I kept looking around expecting to see or hear something. I got to the other bank and was about to climb up, and that's when I paused for some reason. I saw something out of the corner of my eye. Something on the other side of the bridge. I looked over and didn't see anything at first. Then my eyes adjusted. On the far side of the bridge I saw some movement. And yeah, my mind immediately went to the troll/ghost idea. I thought about running off, but something kept me there looking. And then I saw it. A skinny green, long-limbed creature slowly moved out from behind the brush under the bridge. It was hunched over a bit and looked right at me. I mean, it didn't have the stereotypical red eyes or anything, but I could tell that it was looking at me. But that was it. I didn't know if it was scared of me, or angry of me, or what. But I didn't want to find out. When I saw it, I nearly fell backwards on my butt. However, I gained my composure quickly, and I ran up the bank back towards the sidewalk. I ran home at the speed of sound and only looked back once. I didn't see anything, but I had expected to see the creature running after me. To top it off, no one believed a word I had to say. Not my parents, not Sean, not anyone at school. No one. It really sucked to have seen something, whatever the hell it was, but not to have anyone believe you. Well, it didn't suck too bad, because at least I had a Link to the Past to keep playing. Ah, legendary Legend of Zelda games. Eases the pain. This encounter is real, and happened to me 6 years ago when I was 16. I'm female, and I live in New England, where the winters are very snowy with long, cold, dark nights and short days. One such night in February, I was alone in my parents' house, which is in a safe, quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses are still within about 100 feet of each other. My parents had divorced years before, and were still on good terms, so when my mum decided to sell the childhood home, my dad bought it so that I could still continue living there. While in the process of moving, neither of my parents stayed in the house for a couple of nights, and only my room upstairs had furniture. The rest of the house was mostly empty boxes scattered around, and the internet had not yet been switched over, so I often sat on the far end of the living room and mooched off our neighbour's Wi-Fi. It was fun not having my parents there for a couple of nights, so I stayed up late with my new laptop and surfed the web into the early hours of the morning. During my second night of being alone, it snowed late into the evening, and I sat in the dark living room on a folded chair with only my laptop screen for light, with snow falling quietly outside. Their neighbourhood was silent as cars don't usually drive past 10 at night, and neighbours stay inside to keep warm. At 2:30 AM, I decided to head to bed and was wrapping up my internet activities for the night, when I heard 3 very slow, quiet knocks on the front door just a few feet away. I immediately closed my laptop, knowing that the bright screen made me visible to the person outside since the windows weren't covered. I got off my chair and walked very quietly over to the door, and knelt down below the window to listen outside, frozen with fear. I waited for what seemed like a full 2 minutes, when I heard 3 more identical knocks. They were very slow, and would be too quiet to wake anyone who had been sleeping. I gathered the courage to look outside the window, and I saw a dark figure standing very close to the front door. dressed all in black with winter coat and pants. A hood pulled over his head obscured his hair and face, and he stood with his arms to the side. I contemplated calling the police, but ultimately decided to continue waiting. I moved back behind the door away from the window, and after 2 more minutes had passed, I could see the man walking down the walkway. Suddenly he stopped, turned around, and looked directly at the window through which I was watching him. About 15 seconds passed as we stared at each other, but I couldn't see his face under the darkness of his hood. Finally, he turned around and walked out the driveway and down the street. He didn't stop at any other houses, just continued down the street in the falling snow, and I watched him for about 10 minutes until he faded into the darkness. I still live in that house, and occasionally have nightmares in which this scene replays itself. Except in the dreams, I open the door for him. I should preface this story by saying that I run around creepy or abandoned places for fun, with a few of my friends. Technically, I'm a paranormal investigator, but it's just a hobby and an excuse to get together with the gang. So we've been running around every weekend here for the last 3 years at this point. And during this time I've only seen 2 things that suggest paranormal stuff might not be complete bullshit, and both have been at the same place. This was about 1.5 years ago. We pulled into the cemetery with a new guy and an old friend who was interested in the paranormal. He brought a really nice camera and took around 500 pictures, in comparison to my 10 or 12. Off near the edge of the cemetery, there's a kind of natural auditorium where the hills drop off suddenly into a clearing that is surrounded by trees. Only dead brush fills the clearing, as well as the scattered remnants of flowers and wreaths that were blown off the graves. 3 of us are standing there on top of the auditorium, because in the last 2 years that we'd been frequenting this place, that spot always gave off a weird vibe. Like if someone kept changing small details in a room you went into often. Like maybe this time the picture frame was askew, or there was new carpeting or something like that. It just never really felt the same way twice, and the perceived difference made it feel like you were looking for something. Mr. 500 Pictures is off in the cemetery still taking pictures and doing his thing. The 3 of us are near the auditorium, smoking and trying to find out where Waldo went, when it appears. It's a glowing cloaked amber figure that floats through one of the trees crossing the clearing, and disappears inside another one across the way. We're dumbfounded. I was actually holding a camera in my hand at that moment, but I was too surprised and taken aback to even consider that I could photograph it. We're dumbfounded. I was actually holding a camera in my hands at that moment, but I was too surprised and taken aback to even consider photographing it. Besides, there wasn't even enough time for me to boot up the camera and take the picture. What's really weird though is that we didn't all see the same thing. My buddy didn't see an amber figure, but instead described it as a collection of angry static-like lines. The new guy didn't see anything. I've considered that it was some kind of pressure change that could theoretically cause certain neurons to fire in the optical lobe or optical nerve, but I haven't followed up with finding out yet. This happened over a decade ago. I was living alone in a ground floor apartment. I had gone to bed for the evening, but was never a good sleeper, so laying down around 12 and getting to sleep around 2 was pretty good. I had been actually asleep when I was jolted awake by a sudden crash from the next room, which was the kitchen. My apartment was the kind in a large open complex where the doors opened to the outside. Not a big building, and it was in a nice neighborhood. Very quiet, especially at night. There was usually nothing I could hear from my bedroom, so the crash just ripped through complete silence. I had 2 cats, and at first I assumed that they were chasing each other around and had knocked something over. So I started to get up to scold them, but I couldn't pull the blankets back because they were both laying on it, huddled together against my hip, terrified. Huge dilated eyes, ears pinned flat back, puffed up like they'd been electrocuted. These were adult animals that had moved thousands of miles with me and lived in all kinds of situations, with huge dogs and third shift workers and all kinds of commotions. They were not easily frightened, and I have never seen them like this before or since. That bothered me more than the noise. Anyway, as disturbed as I was actually angrier that I had been disturbed from a restful sleep, and I got up to investigate without a thought for safety. Unarmed and nearly naked, I marched across the room and the hall up to the kitchen in the dark, and then I flipped on the light. I almost wish I had found a burglar. My kitchen was small. The sink was opposite the stove, and there was about 8 feet between them. I kept a dish drainer rack sat on the folded dishcloth next to the sink, snugged back against the wall. When I went to bed that night, there had been a ceramic bowl, a couple pieces of silverware, and a plastic food storage container in it. Now, it and all of its contents were scattered at the foot of the stove, the bowl broken. The dish towel had only made halfway and lay directly in the center of the kitchen floor. I can still see it in my mind like a photograph. The dish drainer had launched itself or been thrown or shoved clearly across the kitchen, and with some considerable force. The crash that I heard was it hitting the stove, probably still full as the bowl looked like it broke when it hit the floor, right there at the base of the oven. I wasn't angry anymore. Now I was just confused and suddenly very aware of how late it was, and that I had to try and get up for work in the morning. I picked up the disc rack and set it on the counter nearest where I stood in the entryway, collected the rest of the mess and heaped it up inside the rack, shut the light and returned to my bed. The cats were still huddled and looked to have regained command of themselves. I remember laying down and falling back into fitful sleep for a few hours before waking up in the morning, hoping that I had dreamed of the whole thing. I found the disc rack and the mess right where I'd left it, of course. I was raised to be very skeptical in a secular blue-collar household, where ascribing strange things to the supernatural was considered lazy and childish. I still feel that way, and I'm sure there's some rational explanation for this, but I've never been able to come up with one. Neither have the few people I've told it to. Nothing like this ever happened to me as a child, and I don't remember even hearing about it from old people in my family about anything unexplained or spooky or mysterious. I'll never forget the way my cats looked towards the kitchen when they heard the crash. I've long since given up actually trying to figure it out, but if you have anything to add, I'm certainly listening. Back in the early to mid-1980s, I had a paper route in a medium-sized southwestern Pennsylvania town. I was around 14. I was out one night collecting the subscription fees from my customers. It was winter because I remember the sky was dark, and there was a little snow on the ground, but I was usually done collecting by 6:30. That was on purpose, because the penguins usually came on around 7. It was cold, and I decided that I wanted a hot chocolate for the walk home. There was a convenience store near my paper route. Even now at night, the area is fairly busy with cross-town traffic for a dead-end southwestern Pennsylvania town. Now I headed over to the store and got myself a nice hot cup of chocolate. I paid, and I was walking out to the parking lot, and a dude in a pickup truck, with a cap over the bed, called me over. I figured for some logical reason that he recognized my paperboy receipt book, and thought that I might know the area. My 13-year-old logic. I supposed he was going to ask me for directions. There was some traffic, and the lot was well lit, so I didn't feel any fear. I went over to the truck, and there were 3 occupants. The guy, much older than me, but not as old as my dad, and two cute girls who I recognize were older than me, but I don't really know how much older. Dude looks straight at me and says, "These girls want a party. Get in." That's a direct quote, and I'll never forget it. Now, I'm about 14, pimpy as hell, and I weighed about 95 pounds, soaking wet, with 20 pounds of sand in my pocket. These two chicks want to party with me? Sure. This shit was just screaming danger. I politely declined and started walking towards home. The dude sweetens the pot. "Hey, she really thinks you're cute, and we're having weed and beer. Just get in and let's go." I again declined politely. The whole time the girls have said nothing. I started walking up the road towards my house, and the dude pulled out of their lot and started following me in the truck. A couple of 100 feet up the road, a rail bridge with a retaining wall crossed over the road, and they were on the other end of it, so I could go through a very small wooded area into my neighborhood. I went up the embankment and started crossing the tracks. I could see down the road, and the dude was leaning out of his truck window and looking back at me. I kept walking, and I saw him pass the first turn into my neighborhood, and I was home free. My house was 3 blocks over from the bottom of the hill, and I ran like hell. I got to the 3rd block, and what comes over the crest of the hill? A pickup. It wasn't moving very quickly or anything, so I easily made it to the front porch of our duplex before it passed. I told my dad about it a couple of days later and he freaked out. For about a month, he insisted on driving me along my paper route until I was done. The first time a guy in a car pulled up alongside me and asked me if he could buy an extra paper off me, the dad pulled up and yelled at him to move along. Never saw that truck again. I was so tired when I got home from work. I had been working long shifts all week, and I decided that I would just fall into bed and sleep, even if it meant getting up too early in the morning. So after taking a shower, and then getting dressed for bed, I stumbled into the bathroom. I just flopped down on my bed, and I was out so fast that I didn't recall anything after me touching the bed. I didn't even close my window, and this is significant because there was an outside light directly outside my window. It basically made it half light in my room, but it didn't matter. I was tired and passed out. I don't even know what woke me. I was laying in a very awkward position, and that may have been why. I was on my side, with one of my legs almost touching me on the chest. My other arm was beneath me. I felt awful, and I turned around and laid down on my back. I closed my eyes for a moment, and I thought I fell asleep. But I opened my eyes for some reason. I don't know why, but when I did, I saw a teenage boy standing at the foot of my bed. He was shaking his head for some reason and looking down at the foot of my bed. I turned and looked at the foot of my bed, and there I saw a much younger boy crouched down holding the bedpost. He had a knife in his other hand, and the evilest look on his face I had ever seen. It wasn't a smile. It was angry. Very angry. Freaked out, I screamed and got up and ran to the light switch, turning it on, looking back, and both of the boys were gone. I didn't care. I ran out of the apartment and sat in the hallway until I was able to calm down quite a bit. I didn't have anywhere else to go, and eventually went back in. I searched it and made sure no one was there. They weren't. And I slept with the lights on. I'm a 27-year-old female, and I recently just moved into a nice apartment in a safe neighborhood with my 2 dogs. Charles and Wiggum. Charles is a Corgi/German Shepherd mix, and is the most loving, but overly obnoxious dog, whilst Wiggum is a Lhasa Apso, who is quiet, sweet, and most definitely scared shitless of her own shadow. I'd only been in my new place for about a month, and after this experience, I highly doubt I'm going to make it here for the duration of my year-long lease. The way these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments, and a fire escape door that only opens from the inside. I'm on the back side of the building, which places my patio about 10 feet-ish from the fire escape stairs. I take my dogs out about 3 times a day, with midnight being the latest I will go out by myself. And every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on my patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm, and I had accidentally cracked part of my patio door. It was around 11 PM, and I decided that since it was getting late, I should take the dogs out at night, and since they both hate snow, this would be a quick trip. I got to lock the patio door and decided against it because I'm on the 5th floor and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get the dogs ready, grab my keys and lock my door. I leave the apartment. I let them do their thing at the back of the apartment. We go and we get back in safely, or so I thought. This is where I thought I was losing my mind, but in actuality, shit was about to get real. As soon as we walk into the apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door, and I notice the door is shut and the bar is locked. I go into the kitchen to get a dog treat, and both dogs start going batshit crazy, growling at a large cedar chest in my living room. As I'm walking to see what the commotion is about, I see a pair of eyes creeping from under the chest lid. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what I was seeing, then calmly walked backwards to my front door, opened it, and told my dogs that we would go outside, and they ran out, without leashes, and I immediately got them and myself in the car, locked the doors and called the police. The police showed up in less than 5 minutes, and they got up to my apartment, and after about 20 minutes, 2 officers are dragging a 40-ish-year-old guy out the building in cuffs, and the plot thickens. The dude had been watching me since I moved in, and had been stalking out my place, waiting for an opportunity to get inside because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough already, he had a fanny pack since it was still 1990, and had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture from me the day I moved in. And his plan was to sneak in through my patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and do God knows what to me. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for days because I thought he would be back. Luckily, he's still in jail. But those eyes, I will never forget. When I was younger, around 10 or so, my cat had to be put down as he was extremely diabetic, and my mother couldn't afford to keep paying the ongoing medicine he would need to survive. He was 12 years old at the time. Big, fat, black cat, and loving as the sky is blue. We were best buds, and in my younger days, I would innocently harass the cat so much he would never put a claw mark on me. And in my younger days, I would innocently harass the cat so much, and he never put a claw mark on me. Always slept on my bed, and cried when he couldn't get into my room, rubbed up against me, purred, all the hallmarks of a best bud kitty. Needless to say, when the time came to put him down, I cried for a long time. I never said my goodbyes. I was too afraid and I regretted it. That cat was as important to me as any of my family. Fast forward to some time later, this is where shit gets downright paranormal. I happened to have one of those laser pointer things sitting on my computer desk at the foot of my bed, and it was relatively new. I was lying on my bed at the time, probably watching TV or playing video games or something, It was late afternoon/early evening, and I most definitely was not asleep or tired. So, the thing starts flickering on and off on its own. Weird, right? Not quite creepy yet. So, it stops flickering the moment I sit up and look at it. I was slightly spooked, not sure why it would be doing that. So I stare at it for a minute. It flickers again, same exact pattern as before. In my young mind, I'm certain it's trying somehow to communicate with me. I initially asked it if it was trying to talk to me, and to blink once for yes and twice for no. It blinked once. I asked it if it was a ghost, another single blink, and I asked it if it was going to hurt me, 2 blinks. At that point, I wondered if it was my cat who had recently passed, so I asked, 1 blink. The remainder of this conversation lasted over the course of half an hour. I forget the rest of the sort of things I asked and whatnot, but basically ascertained that it was my cat's ghost come to look after me for a bit, and that I wasn't blamed. I remember crying about it. Afterwards, I gathered the courage to check out the laser pointer, and the batteries were dead. Through the length of the conversation, there was no way it was sheer coincidence. I am an atheist and a skeptic, a firm believer in the scientific process. To this day, I have no rational explanation for what happened, other than it was my cat talking to me after he passed. Since then, I have never experienced anything loopy or that I cannot explain. And that day is the only one from my childhood that I even remotely strongly recollect. Sabbath, if you're somehow hearing this, I miss you, bud. It was last winter and I was walking home from work. I was passing through a small parking lot running alongside an office building, against the wall of a building. In a no parking spot, there was a car parked with the trunk wide open. Then I noticed this man, probably in his late 40s, standing behind the car, and he seemed to be deliberately scooping up as much snow as he could and throwing it into the side of his truck. He was doing it very quickly, as if he was afraid of being caught stealing snow or something. My walk took me a little closer to the man. He hadn't yet seen me walking along, when he stopped piling snow into the truck and started picking up snow off the ground and rubbing it violently against his legs. He was making an angry grunting noise as he did so, which confused me, and I figured that maybe he was trying to clean his pants somehow. I was relatively close at this point, maybe 20 feet or so, and could tell that his pants weren't even dirty. They were totally clean looking. That's when he paused. His body didn't move an inch other than his head, which abruptly turned towards me. The man stood there motionless, hunched over with snow in his hands, staring at me. It wasn't the sort of stare I would have expected. I thought he'd have looked embarrassed, but instead, he was staring at me if I had just defecated on his porch. He was completely still, like a statue, staring at me as if I'd done something horribly wrong. It wasn't even remotely friendly looking in any way, but the mere thought of what I had just interrupted left me feeling more giggly than intimidated, so I kept walking, trying my best not to look. But I could tell that he was watching me out of the corner of my eye, until I rounded the corner of a building. I don't know what a man was doing with the snow, but I'm glad I wasn't closer to him when he saw me. I couldn't take it seriously though, because, come on, the man was throwing snow into his trunk and wiping it all over his pants. After I rounded the corner of the building, I couldn't hold it in and just started laughing out loud at the strange man I had just caught stealing snow. When I was in college, my dorm room was haunted. My bedside lamp would turn on and off by itself when nothing was wrong with it, and my things would sometimes slide across my desk without being touched. It was creepy, but my roommate and I would just kind of ignore it. It only happened with my stuff as far as I knew. Then one day, I was in my dorm room taking a nap, because my roommate was gone for the weekend. I fell asleep and had a dream of a black figure holding a staff following me around. My dream was basically a recap of my day activity, running errands, going to class, and when I saw him, I remember feeling intense dread and going, "Oh, it's you?" I felt like this creature had been following me for a long time. It had been completely black, with huge eyes and white teeth, and it had a very unsettling grin. It seemed like it was taunting me, for lack of a better term. I woke up from my nap and rolled over, and it was at the edge of my raised bed, grinning. I squeezed my eyes shut and hoped it would be gone, but when I opened them again, it was on top of me, and I couldn't breathe. It seemed like this lasted forever, but finally I was able to get it off me and fully sit upright. So I turned on my bedside lamp, and then it turned off. And by this time I was so hysterical, so I pleaded, "Oh please, oh no," and turned it on. And then it went off again, and I finally fled my room. I didn't tell anyone except my sweet mate, who lived next door. She was understanding and gave me a little Buddha figure that I still have next to my bed years later. And while this could be explained by sleep paralysis, the absolute scariest part was that next day my other sweet mate, who knew nothing of what happened to me, said that she was in her room with the door open and saw a shadowy figure of a man standing in the hall looking at her. And then it turned away and took a big step towards my room, at the exact same time I was sleeping that afternoon. Last year around this time, I was at a Christmas party at my friend John's house. I didn't really know anyone there, and didn't do much talking. Everyone at the party seemed really nice, and about an hour after I arrived, we started playing a game called the White Elephant. It was where you trade gifts amongst everyone, and everyone had an opportunity to steal a gift from someone if they liked it more than what they had. I'd never played it before, but I'm pretty sure that's how it worked. In the middle of the game, a woman opened an envelope and read a note of what was inside. Her face turned red, and she became noticeably very uncomfortable and started looking around and was repeating, "This isn't funny." Everyone wanted to know what the note said. She started reading it out loud and then stopped. She couldn't do it. She handed the note to the man and he read it. His face turned red as well, and he seemed uncomfortable too. Now everyone was demanding to know what it said. He gulped and then read the words, "I have killed 6 people. This is not a joke." The room suddenly became quiet and deadly serious. There were gasps and a couple of people said something like, "Very funny." It was clear that the joyous mood was shattered. Some people started yelling and demanding to know who wrote it. I eventually asked to see it, and when it was handed to me I saw that it was typed. People began to argue and I quickly grabbed my coat from the couch in the other room, and I told John I was going to take off. He nodded and was trying to calm people down. I walked out to the door in the fresh falling snow. I haven't spoken with John too much since then, but I did ask him once if he found out who wrote the note, and he said no, and that the party broke up shortly after I left. I often wonder if it was really not a joke, and someone had confessed in a very twisted way to murdering 6 people. I know exactly what people are going to say when they hear this story. They're going to assume that this was an episode of sleep paralysis. However, I'll have to tell them that when this happened, I was completely capable of moving. This was not sleep paralysis in any way. It couldn't be, because I was awake and I could move. Plus, I've never had sleep paralysis before. But the one thing I know about it is that your body has to be paralyzed. So this certainly wasn't the case. So it was a long day at work, and I was just plain exhausted by the time I got home. I pretty much sleptwalked through the rest of my time in the house. So I came through the door, threw my keys onto the coffee table by the side of the door, and plopped down in front of the TV, and tried my best to stay awake for a few hours. But when I decided that there was no way I would be able to accomplish this, I got up and decided to go to bed. I was so exhausted that I honestly have no memory of even going into the bedroom. I have no memory. I do have memory, though, of the blackness that I slept through. The dreamless blackness. And I slept for so long that when I woke up to look at the clock, I knew that it was at least a full 5 hours that had passed since my head hit the pillow. When I woke up, I was still tired, but I also had to go to the bathroom quite badly. So after a few moments of doing that thing, you know, that thing when you try to decide if you really don't have to pee, or if you can just fall asleep again, so that you won't feel like you have to pee. Well, after deciding that there was no way, I threw the covers off me and I scooted to the side of the bed and got up. When I turned towards the door though, I froze. And I froze because there was something standing in the doorway. It was weird, whatever it was. I wasn't even sure what it was because it was so dark, but I could tell that whatever it was formless. But it did have 3 dimensions, and its shape was moving, almost flowing. However, it did have a mouth, and the mouth was not moving nor flowing. It was simply open. And it also had these eyes that were just staring at me. At that moment, all of these thoughts began running through my head, like thinking this creature wanted to eat me or something. It didn't move though. It just stood there and didn't take its eyes off me. I didn't think it was a ghost because I'd always heard that ghosts didn't really look at you. But I knew that this creature or whatever it was looking straight at me. I stumbled back over to my bed, not knowing what else to do. So I pulled the covers over my head, thinking that if I did that and then removed the covers, that the ghost or whatever would just disappear. I pulled the blankets down tentatively, and when I looked, it was still there. I tried again and it was still there. Whatever was going on, it wasn't moving towards me at all. It was just looking at me. I did the only thing I could think of. I put my head back underneath the blanket and just left it there. I didn't look back again. If it was not a ghost, and it was not going to do something, there was obviously nothing I could do to stop it. That didn't mean I had to look at it though. After I had my head in there for what felt like half an hour, I looked back again, and it was gone. I, however, was too worked up by what I saw to go to sleep. I just laid in bed all night, looking and hoping that it would never come back. A few years ago, my parents and I moved out to the Maritimes. My parents were retiring, and I was done in high school. Our house is situated at the very centre of, and I mean literally, the very centre of the village. There are around 20 people in this place at the most. The house is 300 feet away from the road, and has forests surrounding it, except the front, which are fields that border the driveway. Anyway, the year we moved, I ended up moving away to Ottawa for school. That same year, I went back home for Christmas between semesters. I am your typical night owl, and my parents hate it. They were bugging me about sleeping in so much, because they hadn't seen me in months and I was sleeping away all our time together. So anyway, on the night of the incident, I stayed up until sunrise, hoping to fix my sleep cycle. It was around 5:45 a.m. when my dog woke me up and came into the room. She rested her head on my lap, and so I knew she wanted out. I made my way downstairs, made myself a tea, and then put a coat on. For whatever reason, that winter it didn't snow much, and this particular day it had snowed around 2 a.m. I remember because when I went to go use the bathroom, I got excited when I saw it falling. I put my hand on my coat and headed out with my dog. Usually she bolts out the door and does laps around the house at full gallop, but today she didn't. Instead, she put her nose to the ground and trotted slowly around the house. I thought it was strange, so I followed her. That's when I noticed the footsteps. My parents' property has 3 buildings on it. A 2-door garage, a workshop, and the house itself. The driveway runs from the road and sort of pools connecting all 3 buildings. All buildings make an L shape. The snow that had fallen was only 2 centimeters or so, and so I noticed, running from the forest, was a set of footprints to behind the house. I was extremely curious and I followed them. They literally came out of the forest and ran behind my house, where they stopped at a window. I lined my feet up and found myself looking in the window. Then the prints turned 90 degrees and vanished back into the forest. That's when I realized the snow had fallen at around 2 a.m, so whoever had left those prints must have come after that, or they wouldn't have left the prints. And well, I assume most of the world is dark between 2 and 5:45 a.m. So either this guy was wandering around the woods at night, or had wandered up when the sun came up, which was about 40 minutes ago. So I shouted for my dog and we hustled inside. I told my dad, and he told me that he'd left the prints, which is bullshit, because I was up all night and I heard him snoring. Thanks for trying to calm my nerves anyway, Dad. Now, while all of this might not be too spooky in itself, the implications are far-reaching. Perhaps this person wanted to do something malicious, and was just waiting for the opportune moment to come in and strike. But perhaps decided against it. I don't know. I'm just glad that whoever decided to stare at that window for God knows how long, turned back into the woods and never came back. My one ghost story might not be as interesting as most other ones, and not as long, but it was probably scarier at least. My family always thought that my house was haunted growing up. They heard noises or something that sounded like something was walking around in the attic. Lights would come on, supposedly without anyone remembering turning them on. Things like that. I never believed in any of it, so I didn't care. But one night, I was up late doing homework, and by the time I was in bed, the rest of my house was long asleep. I went and got ready for bed. I heard some of those noises in the attic. You know, the one my family always thought were ghosts or something like that, and I paid them no mind. I got into bed and laid down. I was beginning to drift off when I heard a voice whisper in my ear, "Hey, Tim." My eyes immediately opened, and I looked down to see who it was. There was no one there, and I assumed I was dreaming. But then I looked down and saw a hand reaching from under my bed, and it was resting right near my ankle. I yelled and recoiled in the bed, moving up against the wall. The arm remained for a moment before retracting. My parents ran into the room to find out why I was yelling. I told them what I had just seen under the bed. They checked, and there was nothing. They were bemused, happy that the skeptic had finally experienced the ghost. I maintained that it was probably my imagination, but everyone felt I was just covering. Maybe I was. Who knows for real? As part of a family trip when I was 8 years old, We stayed at the Columbia City Hotel in California. The place is a gold rush hotel, which is supposedly haunted. But it was for the general gold rush history that we were staying there. I remember hearing some sort of tour describing the ghostly activity to do with the miners and gold prospectors. But I wasn't part of the tour, and I was really just hanging around waiting for my parents to finish checking in. That night when we went to sleep, I had pretty much forgotten that the place was supposedly haunted. Sometime in the early morning, I woke up crying after a nightmare, and I still remember being in a state between alert and asleep. While lying in my bed, I could faintly hear a soft woman's humming, which sounded like a lullaby, almost like what my mother might do. But I also noticed that it sounded very close when my parents were sleeping on the other side of the room. I wasn't afraid, even when I heard a calming and soft, "Shh, go back to sleep, baby." Still sleepy, I did actually drift off back to sleep. The next day, when I was chalking it up to a dream, I heard the tour again talk about a young woman who in the gold rush era has stayed in a room. Apparently, her child had died in infancy there, and she grieved at something fierce. Enough that they claimed people still heard the infant's cries and her singing at night. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Just a reminder that Creeks and Peaks and myself are currently hosting a competition to win some amazing original artwork. You can find the link in the description if you would like a chance to win. If you enjoyed the video today, please remember to give it a big thumbs up and consider subscribing for even more stories every day. Don't forget that if you'd like me to read your story on my channel, feel free to send it to my email or share it to my Reddit, which is of course available in the description. Just please make sure to include as much punctuation and descriptive language as possible, as it will maximize the chances of it being read. But anyway, for now guys, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.